Okay, so here we are, April 24th, I think, and we've just read through chapter 5 on the Saturn-Pluto cycle. And once again, I think we can just jump in at any point. It's a very heavy chapter. There's a lot to talk about. Does anyone want to get the ball rolling on this one? Don't be afraid.
Nobody's volunteering.
Well, I can start with my sort of final thoughts on the chapter, since it ends talking about works of art or like creative work. So I hear myself echoing.
I think someone is unmuted and we're getting an echo. So maybe we should mute first.
Testing. Okay, I think it's done. Thank you. Yeah, I think that when the chapter ended on talking about sort of creative works that came out of that cycle, it made me start thinking about what might have, all the works that might be in development or were developed during 2020 and 2021, and that I felt very checked out of like contemporary philosophy and contemporary literature, and I actually have no idea like what people are talking about other than just like current events and the sort of political activity taking place, and but like so beyond things like, I guess, like Black Lives Matter movements and various like other political movements that happened concurrently with the pandemic. I'm curious if anybody has knowledge of any like publications or can sort of speak to what they think is a analogous like creative output that has come from the darkness that everybody experienced for the past few years.
Can I make a comment? I agree with you too, Genevieve, that I liked at the end where he was talking about the great work to be done. And I got the sense that even with all this darkness, there's always something good bubbling under the surface that's going to emerge that we can't see it because we're so overwhelmed with the darkness of the politics and war and everything else. And it's almost like you have to have faith that something good will emerge. And there are underground movements like the whole Greta movement with the environment. And yeah, I feel too sort of overwhelmed with the news as always. The politics is just so domineering in the news cycle. It's like you can't stop thinking about it. So it's hard to see what good things are happening out there, but I'm sure they are. I'm curious to see what's going to emerge too.
On the note of Greta, I remember listening to one talk of Richard Tarnas, and he mentioned how she was born during this opposition that Tarnas covers in the 2004 period.
That's right.
I felt like she was a good example of carrying like she's very serious minded, and just very committed and dedicated, and people seem to be drawn to that. So she seems to carry that energy in a way that's more positive.
Yeah, and I forgot the name of the young woman. Was she from India? I forgot her name, but she was shot in the eye. She was advocating for education for young women, and she survived, and she's really become a leader in that movement too. So
Malia,
thank you. Yeah, you don't see the good news as much on the TV screens as you do the wars and all the oppression. Yeah, it seemed like there's the whole youth movement. I have great faith in my grandsons. As a matter of fact, I told them, whatever you do, don't give up, you know. I just had a lot of faith in the youth. We were young ones too. I'm an old hippie. We made it through somehow. A few little drugs helped here and there, right?
Pia, did you have something?
yeah, I did. I don't know if I imagine you all know who Fareed Zakaria is. he was on this morning, and he was talking about climate change and interviewing, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but he is the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, and they were talking about producing sustainable energy for third world countries and people who are very, very poor, like in India or in South America, people who don't have electricity, because if they come on board in the way that we are, we're already destroying the planet. We have to find a solution. And I found that really positive. I think that that's what I was saying to Tim when we first opened up, is that there is this wonderful dual possibility in this energy, and it comes down to choice, and it comes down to what you do with it. So the impetus, the will to power, can also be the will to change. And I was thinking a lot about Taoist philosophy too, because this is a very Western-oriented perception. And there are other ways of perceiving the balancing forces in nature. So when he was talking this morning about all of these potentials for grabbing, for instance, moisture from the environment on things that look like trees, and they gyrate around and they produce, they take moisture from the atmosphere in the nighttime, which would be dew, but it would evaporate, and they contain it. So I think that there is this great potential to take the disaster that we're sitting in and revolutionize it with the same energies that are oppressing it. At least those were my thoughts. Those were my thoughts. So I say yay. Don't get depressed. Do the right thing.
I don't really have examples, but I have a sense that women are finding their voices. It just feels like that to me, and that circles that I go around in. And I think men too are becoming more tender. And I mean, I see young fathers like Tim just being wonderful, involved dads. And so I just feel like that's something that's happening, and it certainly would be beneficial to continue.
Yeah, I think it's a good
Going
point.
back to,
Oh,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to refer back to your question about the literary stuff. I would hazard that what is being written, or what has been written over the past couple of years, isn't actually going to start being published until, things lighten up. And I would say maybe right now with Jupiter and Pisces would possibly be a time when things get published in the next couple of years. The thing to do is to pay attention to that sort of stuff. And it gets harder every day because so much of that promotion happens on the internet. And if you're not clued in specifically and following like specific publishers or stuff like that, you don't really hear about it until it hits, the media. And so these cycles take time to actually play out. And I think there are going to be some very crucial pieces of literature that are written, in this time period, but we won't really know about them until, a year or two out.
Yeah, and I guess one of the other sort of revolutionized or things that have been revolutionized during this time is also like technology and publishing too. Like all of that has also changed in like radical ways as well. So it's like kind of another weird variable in like the technology being revolutionized while society is at the same time. And Katie, to speak to what you were saying, there was a point, there was a line in I think it was the last part of this chapter where he mentions a letter that Jung responded to from a woman who was dealing with this crisis of balancing like motherhood and career. that I found really interesting. And his response was sort of like speaking to the need to just have balance and not try to prioritize one or the other, and just see how, just endure the process of figuring out the balance, which I thought was kind of interesting, because like, right, I feel like over the pandemic, or like the last few years, there's been much more of an emphasis on like work-life balance and like providing time for like parenthood, and rather than sort of striving to have it all, or for like women or families to like hold both extremes, where like they have to be like full-time career people and full-time parents. And I feel like one of the things that has come out of the pandemic is people realizing that they can't do both extremes at the same time, that they have to like balance them. And so I thought that was an interesting, I like your point. I think that kind of is related. I wish I had the page number. I should have highlighted or something.
Genevieve, what you had mentioned earlier about any book, I recently read a book called The Sentence by Lois Erdrich. She's a Native writer, and she brought up George Floyd. The setting of the novel is Minneapolis, and yeah, she had a statement in there that felt so exactly what the chapter was about. She said the protests about police brutality really showed us how brutal the police really were. And I mean, it was, and then she mentioned Kenosha, Wisconsin. I live in Wisconsin, not, maybe an hour away from Kenosha. Yeah, I mean, she wrote about it, and the whole story is about a ghost basically looking for gratitude or thanks for things that have gone on that people don't recognize. But the protest part, just, how she honed in on that was like, whoa, that's very now. I mean, the book was just published in last year, so there are, I didn't know that when I picked it up. I just like reading Native authors. Oh,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That actually, it reminds me of what people often say or bring up about imagery from the Vietnam War as well, and that like it, and I guess a lot of what he was talking about in terms of like revealing the shadow side of things, that like the war in itself was horrible, but it also was revealing of like the sort of inner, like the potential for evil, and like I think showed a lot of people, or created the opportunity for people to face like that dark side and reject it in many ways.
I guess maybe I'm just thinking about one thing where I see real change among women is among Black women. They are really getting it together, and they are telling it like it is. And I think that's a huge, I mean, it's not a huge change. They've always done that, but it seems to be gelling now.
Well,
Yeah,
the
I think
change
that's
is
definitely
that, sorry. I was just saying the change is that the media is actually paying attention to Black women now. They didn't get any attention before, and now there's all sorts of Black women that are becoming well known for their voices, for artistic endeavors, for political ideas, for activism, all of it. It's unfortunately there's also a lot of news about like the police brutality. I'm trying to think of the name of the young woman who was a healthcare worker and was killed in her own home by police invading because they had the wrong information as to the person that they were looking for. And she was just basically collateral damage. That was horrible in early 2021, I think it was it last year, sometime in the spring. Yeah, unfortunately, you know, that's what part of the being recognized is these voices are now coming out, and we're having to hear of the real trouble and strife that being a minority person is like, you know. So it's kind of heartbreaking on a certain level, but there's so many other Black women who are really getting their voices heard, and that's a wonderful thing.
Pia, do you want to talk about the quote you dropped in the chat?
My dogs just came in. I put that there because I just finished something called Magnum Opus, which is a Jungian work on, anyway, and it was all about introspective and questioning and looking for your shadow, and Jung's famous saying that the real danger is not out there, it's in here. And I was just thinking about what you had asked about what's happening in the outer world. And I was just thinking, for me anyway, it's such a tendency to want to have an answer, even in looking at the stars for answers, or and I just really like that quote. I've liked it since I was in high school, you know, just be content with the questions themselves and live in the questions. And something about the energy of that is archetypal, just living in the question itself, and it moves you forward. And on a second part of that is when you're walking towards your destiny is also walking towards you. And that helps me when I feel really anxious. When I was reading the beginning of this chapter, it provoked a lot of anxious feeling in me, because it seemed so deterministic in a way. It's just like, oh my God, here we are in Saturn Pluto alignment, and Uranus does this, and then all of a sudden you've got creativity and death, and you know, it can be overwhelming to approach life with these huge archetypal energies. And archetypal energies are consuming. They are all consuming. And that is part of Jungian psychology, is that they can, if you don't take a look at them, they get up and they grab you, and they will take you rather than you, if you understand them, being able to be in communion with it, to somehow understand, oh, there I go again. Oh, you know, which I think if you have some understanding of archetypal psychology, perhaps you can know that about yourself on your personal transits. As to world transits, that's a lot more complicated, because it's such a big animal. It is such a big animal. So that's why I put that quote there, is that there's so much happening right now. And as Tarda says over and over and over again in all of the chapters, these are multivalent energies. They are unpredictable. They are only knowable almost as energies themselves, like being at the crest of a wave or at the trough of a wave. They come and they go. And so I was just sort of reaching out to you to say, don't worry too much about it. Be content with the question. And like you brought up with the answer that Jung made to that woman, you know, at the turn of the century, who was struggling with her pull between her masculine energies, her career, and her feminine energies to be with her children. And he was saying you have to balance them. And I really like Rilke, and he's got that famous poem. And in the book, there's only the last stanza, stretch yourself between two opposing poles, because it is inside humans that God learns. But if you go and you Google that and you read the whole poem, it is absolutely stunning. You know, The Winged Energy of Delight is the name of the poem, and it is absolutely stunning poem. And he wrote that during this exact, you know, alignment. And he was born, from what I remember in the book, into that incredible tension between the opposites, and that stretching yourself between them and not giving into one or the other, but going for that third thing, which Jung called the transcendent function. You know, 1 + 1 = 3. It doesn't equal 2. It equals the third thing, the crescendo of the two coming together, the conjunctionis. So that's why I put that there in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a really great quote. I think it's very apt for this chapter as well. And it's funny because it speaks to my question. Like my question is both like what do we learn from this right now? And like that's it, I don't know, even asking that question is kind of part of the cycle, which is super interesting.
It is. And I so love that you are asking that. And just finishing this class, it was an international class that I took, and intergenerational. There were people in their 20s, there were people in their 80s. And it was really interesting during that class how we all approached, the different stages of this magnum opus. It was a year-long course, looking at the shadow, looking at the light, looking at the phoenix side of the darkness, that things do fall apart, but they do come back together and have a new interpretation. And so I was reaching out to you. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm gonna go read the poem too.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem.
Yeah, it is. One thing I thought was interesting was how much Richard Tarnas was talking about the whole cycle and comparing the cycle from the conjunction to the square to the opposition, and then back to a square, and then the next conjunction, which is kind of a theme that he's going through in all these sort of subchapters, comparing. And I was also quite intrigued at how much he was referring back to the previous section where he dealt with Uranus and Pluto. He brought Uranus in quite a bit, sort of showing how there were two different cycles, but that they overlapped. So it's always kind of interesting. The thing with astrology is that the conjunction is usually thought of as an initiating point. It's not always, it doesn't always work out that way, but the opposition is the opposite point from the conjunction. And so there's a parallel there. Sometimes things can begin at the opposition rather than at the conjunction. But the squares then have a slightly different sort of thing, and it's more obvious in his very first chapter where he's talking about the wars, because the wars always seem to be occurring after a square has completed between Saturn and Pluto. So that was just an interesting observation I made, based on my knowledge of astrology.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually trying to think about that in terms of like now, and then I was like trying to parallel when everyone was talking about like when will this war in Ukraine be over, and I was like, well, when was like V-Day in Europe, and then like when did they sign the treaty, and like trying to figure out at what point. And I think interestingly, I think they signed it a year after the end of the conjunction, or a couple years after, I believe. If I'm not totally wrong, my math might be totally wrong, but I think you're right. It's like the certain aspects or certain alignments, they seem to have different impact, I guess, depending on what which archetypes are involved, I guess. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, it plays into the moon sun cycle of the new moon waxing until it becomes a full moon and then waning in the following sequence. And so in astrology, they apply similar sort of ideas along those lines. And so, oftentimes you're told to initiate things at a new moon. And then the idea is that at the full moon, they'll either have fruition or at least at some point reach a certain point where they can develop further, depending upon what it is that you're initiating. And then there's always a lot of discussion about how doing things at a full moon can be very negative or detrimental. Sometimes it's not as effective. But the full moon is when people usually, you hear about hospitals. I worked for a time at a psychiatric clinic, and the full moon was always when we had the most amount of clients coming in looking for help. And it was always more chaotic than at the new moon. And so it's that sort of parallel that, where they suggest that you don't actually try to do things at opposition, because you're less likely to be successful in the long term.
Does that mean everything should be done during the waxing moon? Is that?
Well, it depends upon what you're doing. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about it, and as some people, I've just seen a lot of stuff on Twitter where there's criticism of people who do things at a full moon. So I try not to be too terribly superstitious about it. I don't try to plan my life around the planets, but having studied astrology, it's one of those things that there's an archetypal energy around those 2 points, and if you're aware of them, you're less likely to have failures. If you're paying attention to that sort of thing. But it also plays into how history revolves and how these cycles line up. I'm not sure I have anything very deep or profound to say about it right now, but.
Looks like we lost Pia.
Oh yeah.
Her dogs. Her dogs took her away.
I'm just looking at the rest of the sections here. Was there any other section that kind of stood out for people? I kind of started at the end, I realized. we jumped in.
I was amazed when we got to the end, speaking of the end, at how excited I got, because those were all my favorite books and movies. And I thought, does that mean I'm really dark? Or does that mean I have, something in my chart that speaks to that? Because they are all things that throughout my life really spoke to me. The poets, the playwrights, their struggles, movies, except for Mel Gibson, couldn't relate to that one at all. And I don't know if it's just speaking to the human dilemma itself, because that's what they are addressing. Kafka, Rilke, even Thomas Aquinas, pulling his hair out and banging his head against the wall. And I know he said, why is it that I cannot do what I know I must do, but always do what I know I must not? I think that is partly the human dilemma. And for me, that came up over and over again, because I was like, this is speaking, yes, okay, I understand these heavy forces of Pluto and, Saturn and what they're doing, the will to power and the will to live, and how our instinctual impulses are combating the need for order. And I feel like that's always there. And then I came to the image of the wave, that it's like a wave of energy, because if everything is energy, which is part of my philosophy, then even these archetypal energies are energy, and they are like crescendos and diminuendos in music. Because if I take it too seriously and too personally, then you get stuck with the image or the symbol and not with the message. That's how I resolved this heavy duty stuff. If that makes any sense.
Pia, I had a question. Did you have a chance to see that documentary, The Changing of the Gods? Yeah, I thought that was visually, because I'm more visually oriented. For me, it was much easier to understand, to actually see those little planets changing, going through all the cycles. Yeah, and then he would have the the imagery in the background, the historical events that happened. I thought that was really helpful. The book is wonderful, but it's so dense with details. It's almost like I need to take those lists and chart them out and draw little pictures, you know, and put them in 3 dimensions or something. Otherwise it's hard for it to sink in all the way.
Yeah, Tim's file that he posted, the timeline is very useful for looking at the long picture.
Yeah, that really made a difference. I sort of got lost in that, going through the lists and remembering some of those events. And I also like the natal chart of the 911 event. I mean, it looks so simple, but really when you look at it, I thought that it was interesting. I don't have, my printer doesn't work, but I think it was the sun was in the 12th house, and it was square both Pluto and Saturn. And I thought to myself, that's interesting, the sun being in the 12th house, when it was almost like the day of 911, the darkness of the 12th house just blotted out the sun the way it did in New York. It was such a beautiful morning. And then also, I think in the 3rd house, I forget which planet was in the 3rd house, but it was like for communication, which was opposite the 9th house. It was like this message really impacted everybody across the world because everybody witnessed it at the same time. So the 9th house I see is international affairs, and the 3rd house is communication, and it all just kind of fell into place. I thought it was really an interesting, nice, clean, simple chart. Did you put that up there, Nathan, on Facebook?
No, that was Tim.
Oh, Tim, okay.
And I think he was trying to illustrate the square that is mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
I actually have a file. I'm kind of looking it up that also illustrates it pretty well.
I saved it too, but I
see
can't
that.
find it right now. But
Yeah, I'm reading I'm listening to the book as an audio book. Even though I've already read it before, but I one of the downsides of that is that I don't get any of the visuals, so I just have to like either imagine them or recreate them online, which is a little bit interesting. So I'm so grateful for the diagrams being posted.
Are you an artist, Genevieve?
Yeah, why do you ask?
Why do I ask? My favorite animal in the entire world, and there are so many, is the dragonfly, because the dragonfly has 10,000 optical units in each eye. It can fly forward, backwards, up, down. It can hold still in the air. And I think artists are sort of like that. That's why.
Thank you. My Chinese zodiac, my lunar zodiac is dragon. I mean, that's not dragonfly, but maybe it's related.
I'm uploading to the chat a file that is a picture of the Grand Cross. It's a format that I don't know if everybody can use. So if you give me a minute, I can transfer it to a PDF here. But go ahead and talk if you want to. I'm listening.
I was gonna say I'm on a Mac, so I can't open the
Well, I get a notice that there's a potential security issue detected with this file.
I got the same thing, yeah.
Okay, that's because it's a Microsoft file, and it probably is an open source thing. So you don't have to accept it. I'll put it into a PDF, and that might be a little more acceptable to your security.
Okay,
It's going to
thanks.
take me a minute because I'll have to create a whole new file. I just wasn't really prepared to send that single image. Let's see here. Yeah.
I saved it, but I'm not sure if I know how to share it. Can I just try clicking on the share screen? I don't know if I'm doing this right. Oh, I can't share it. Okay.
Tim would have to
That's
give you
right.
permission, I think.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
Did anybody skip ahead to the next section at all?
No, not me.
I think I accidentally started listening to the first few minutes of it, but I found it interesting because like the first question that I had and sort of wrapping up that was like, what are what's the creative output here? Or like, what's the positive side of this? And then the next section is cycles of creativity and expansion. So I thought maybe, I mean, I think it makes sense that he would put that there. But I was curious if anybody had taken a peek at all.
yeah. I did see that, but I didn't delve into it yet. But that was like a sigh of relief.
I found myself when going through the chapter 5 is constantly referring to my own natal chart, and make all these notes because I was born 6 degrees of a Saturn Pluto conjunction. I have to look it up now. And what does that mean in my personal life? And, then going back and trying to, because there was so much negative in the Saturn motifs and the Pluto motifs that Tarna's put forward. And I'm like, there's got to be positives in both of these. And I don't know astrology well enough to, to pull those out of, without going to books, spending hours reading. But I was still trying to look for a thread in all of these combative alignments that have happened between the planets where man has been pushed aside, or the collective has been pushed aside in favor of individual rights. And I don't know, we're kind of at that point right now is how I feel. Like we fail to honor the earth and what is sacred about the earth, the air we breathe, the trees, all the water, and how is that shown up in all these past alignments? And going forward, can we do something to change that? Because I think what I've seen is there's a strong social response to every time these alignments happen, yet not. I mean, there's protests and wars, but yet not, I feel helpless, like I can't do anything about what's going on the other side of the planet right now. But I'm aware of it. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but just thoughts that came up.
Yeah, knowing how to react to things is not easy to do when you're looking at astrology. It doesn't always tell you, oh, you should be wary of this, or, you kind of have to use your own intuition and philosophy to figure out how to react or what's the best way to react to something.
What I thought was interesting towards the end of this chapter 2, when he was talking about the Great New World or whatever, how we don't have really much of a choice. It chooses us globally, collectively. all the different changes and the planetary aspects, and it's just part of our evolution as humanity, I guess, too. So it's like you have to go with the flow somehow and find a way. I find it interesting how whenever something devastating and horrible happens across the globe, it does seem to bring out the goodness in people as well. You know, it's almost like it's sort of shocking in the last few years, learning and coming to realize the shadow side of politics across the globe and how much corruption there has been all along, and we never saw it. And now it's starting to come out so we can see it, and now we can react to it, we can do something about it, whether positive or negative. But it is like we're sort of being swept along. We really have to make a choice as individuals and as a collective, as humanity, you know.
Well, we definitely have to figure out whether we're going to stick with democracy or not in the United States. It looks like we're willing to let it go, from my point of view.
Well, and I thought was interesting also, because I am a little bit of a news junkie. Richard Engel is a reporter for MSNBC. He's a foreign correspondent. He's been on for quite a few years, and I really like him. He's always giving really great reporting. And he mentioned, this was like 2 years ago maybe, and maybe because I don't pay that much attention to foreign affairs, or you're so involved with your own little world. And he mentioned that this whole shift to ultra conservatism was actually everywhere. He found it all over Europe and different Middle Eastern countries. And I didn't realize that. I thought it was just happening here. So that was good for me to open up and see that it is like a planetary shift almost, really. It's, you know, Saturn working us all over, I guess. And it is frightening. It's scary because you just don't know how the balance is going to go.
Well, yeah, and that's like what happened in Italy in the 1700s. You know, it was a lot of debauchery, and then Savonarola, is that how you say his name, came in, and suddenly it was, he's supposedly the good guy, you know, representing God, but he came down on people with such horrific tortures. You know, it's like, what, you know? So yeah, you get that real dichotomy constantly. And you're right. I think we're just going along with it. I mean, but to recognize it and be ahead of it is where I'm trying to, like, okay, there's got to be some way and not that we can outsmart the planets, but outsmart the human psyche. I don't know.
Yeah. Sometimes it seems like it's hard to know how to discern what's true and what isn't, you know?
Especially now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Well,
really have to use your own awareness of what truth is in order to sort through the things that are false and what's true.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that file.
Sure. Yeah, I hope that is a better file for people to use.
Yeah.
It should work.
I'm trying to look at it right now. So this is just the month of September.
Yeah, and I'm only showing Pluto, Saturn, and the sun and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
There are other planets usually, you know, but those are the main ones that we've been studying. So I kind of was focusing on it to show where those planets were at that point. And that is the full moon before 9/11. So it should say a date on it. I think it's September 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So interesting.
When I open it, Nathan, I get like a series of files, and it doesn't show me what I think is in there. Do you have any ideas about why?
It probably didn't download properly. You probably should delete it and then try downloading it again. But just make sure you download the PDF, the second file that I loaded, not the first one.
Oh, okay. Just giving me the option to save, but it still says 0409 or Adobe, Advanced Installers, AFZA, AMET, App Locker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not opening the file. Oh,
I'll be
well,
posting.
never mind.
I'll be posting this on Facebook. So
Okay.
later. So yeah.
Thank you for doing it anyway.
I'm sure.
I just made a screenshot too, so it's a pretty simple image file in case that might work better. Just a PNG file.
Oh, right. Okay, great.
But yeah, if it's on Facebook, then see it there too. I have to hop off in about 5 minutes, but does anybody, I can't tell how long the next section is. I guess it's shorter than chapter 5, right? It's a little bit shorter. It seems like it. How are people feeling about meeting next week for this one, or did people want to do 2 weeks again? I wasn't sure if anybody talked about that, or if Tim wants to chime in, if he can hear me at all.
I would be open to meeting next week. This seemed like a really long period. Of course, I missed the last meeting too, which didn't
91.
help.
251.
Yeah,
It's definitely it's like half as long. So
yeah.
Sorry to have missed most all of this. I've been having to run around, but I'm okay with the 2-week time span. What do people think, though? Was that the question?
I was saying it's a much shorter chapter, so I'm fine either way.
Yeah.
I think it made sense for sure for this last one because it was so much longer. But I'm also totally fine to do 2 weeks as well. But I'm good for next Sunday too.
I've been procrastinating with all this amount of time. I tend to be trying to rush to finish the chapter at the very end.
Yeah.
So we have more.
I did the same thing and I didn't get through it.
Yeah, same here. That's me.
I kind of thought we had all found ourselves in the same boat.
So maybe 2 weeks again.
Sure.
I think Deborah posted in the chat that she felt like 2 weeks is a little bit long.
Oh, okay.
Well, only,
Either way,
Okay.
yeah, for me, the 2 weeks, because I want to get through it and I want to understand it more. And by drawing it out so long, I was starting to get foggy in my brain. Like I'm constantly looking down on my notes, like, what did I read 2 weeks ago? Remember? And I'm like, oh.
If people want it.
But
About your chapter 2. There's finally some, it's a chapter of breakthroughs and good fortuitous happenings. So it might be easier to read it quickly, kind of skipping along rather than Saturn Pluto energy.
I think we should make the last session a complete marathon where we reread the whole book
Yeah.
No.
for review, right?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I'll watch the movie again.
There you go.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm good for next week. Should we just
Yeah,
say-
I vote for next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can
I
do-
agree.
Well, I'm gonna miss next week. I will be in the Bronx, but I won't be able signing on to Zoom. So,
If you want to come into Brooklyn, you can visit Genevieve and me.
okay, all right.
Well, if you maybe if you have thoughts that you want to share, you can email or post them to the group, and we can talk about them, and then you could watch the recording or whatever.
Mhm.
Oh, what was the last part?
Oh, I was just saying, Katie, if Katie can share her thoughts on the chapter in the group, and we'll be sure to bring up those points next week. But yeah, thank you all for a lovely discussion. It was like, it's funny, I think it's obviously one of the darker cycles, but I feel like it was a very, like, one of the most thought-provoking of the book so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask if anybody else had a particularly rough week this past week? From, just lots of stuff happening.
I did feel a little overwhelmed this week, yeah.
I was evacuated twice because of fires. Does that count?
Oh my God.
Yes, that counts. Yeah. And we've got about 20 fires in our state going right now. And especially there's one that's been pressing up against a place where I've done holotropic breath work. And it's I'm scheduled to go again in July, and I want it to be there. So it felt like a whole lot of stuff got bulldozed into a few hours, that just everything fell apart for me anyway. But I had a good morning, so I'm settled.
I did a 25-mile bike ride today, so I feel a little more settled.
Wow.
Well, I only did 8 miles, but I did bike along with a Dragonfly. Dragonfly came along and biked along with me for a few feet.
Wonderful.
Well, I need to go too. I have another Zoom, so.
Okay. Everybody have a good week, everybody. I'm gonna
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
See you next week.